When I first got started in property, I didn't have a huge deposit. In fact, I had less than 5%, so I could only just afford the property, and I definitely couldn't afford any unexpected costs. So what's the problem with this? I got caught out. After months of searching, I found the perfect home in the right suburb for the right price, and I was ready to jump on it and sign my life away. There was just one problem. The place was a dud. Without the strategies I'm about to cover, I would have gone ahead with the purchase, and it literally would have cost me over $9,000 in special levies, fees, and charges in the first year alone. It was just money I didn't have. In fact, I've used the strategies in this video to grow my own property portfolio to over 6 properties in just a few short years. Hey, I'm Jaden Vecchio from Hunter Galloway Mortgage Brokers, and in this video you'll see the exact tips on how to avoid the same mistakes that I made, as well as 10 others you can start implementing today. Let's get started. First up, let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, insurance, but specifically lender's mortgage insurance. Now, this is a type of insurance for your loan, but not necessarily a type of insurance that covers you. Around 70% of households think lender's mortgage insurance is there to protect them rather than the bank, but this is simply not true. Lender's mortgage insurance allows the bank to lend to people with less than a 20% deposit and is there to cover the bank in case those people's loan goes into default. So while it benefits you from being able to buy a home with less than a 20% deposit and as little as 5% deposit, it's there ultimately to protect the bank and not to protect you. Now that we've cleared that up, how much does LMI cost? The cost is effectively a sliding scale. So the bigger the house, the bigger the lender's mortgage insurance premium. For example, on a $600,000 house with a 10% deposit, the lender's mortgage insurance premium is going to be around $10,000. Now you might already know about lender's mortgage insurance, but did you know that LMI costs actually differ between banks? The cheapest lender, that's around $10,000, all the way up to lender G, which is $16,000, can cost you an extra $6,000 in extra lender's mortgage insurance. This is for the exact same borrower, for the exact same purchase. Nothing else is different except for the bank. Now, the best way around this is to look at different lenders or ask your mortgage broker to not just compare rates, but also compare lender's mortgage insurance premiums. Remember, the cheapest rate doesn't necessarily mean the cheapest loan when it comes to LMI. Because imagine if you paid that $6,000 extra. On a 30-year loan term, this can cost you up to another $27,000 of interest over the life of the loan. Yeah, that's a lot of money. Our second tip on hidden costs is borrowing costs. Now, in property, lots of little things end up adding up to become big things. And in my case, I went to settlement thinking that the bank was there, happy to cut a check for my loan, charge me a big fat interest fee, and that was gonna be that. But that wasn't the case. On the settlement of my first home, I had to scramble to find another $1,200 in costs just to cover my bank and application fees, which was just money that I didn't have. So I had to stick it on the credit card. But realistically, this could have been completely avoided if it had been factored in up front. Now, it might seem a little bit illogical for a lender to charge you a fee just for the, being able to apply for a loan, but the fact is they have processes and lawyers in different parts of the bank that actually cost them money to process the loan application. These application fees range from $500 to $600 depending on the bank and depending on the type of loan that you're applying for. These fees can include, like I said, loan application fees, annual fees, discharge of settlement fees, or bank valuation fees, lots of different fees. All up, like I said, between $500 to $600. Just make sure you factor that in there because it's there. But I've got some good news. In a lot of cases, we've actually been able to get these fees waived for our borrowers. So talk to your broker up front to make sure you factored in these fees so you don't get caught out on settlement like I did. Tip number 3, government fees. Now, government fees, I think, are the complete secret sting. They're a bit of a rip when it comes to property, but it's got to be paid. Now, by government fees, I'm not talking about stamp duty. That's something I'm going to come back to in a minute. These government fees can add up to a few $100s. So again, you don't want to get caught out. These government fees include register of mortgage, register of discharge, and transfer of title fee. So in addition to stamp duty, you'll pay the privilege of having your title formally stamped, unstamped, and then transferred at settlement. Thanks, government. Mortgage fees vary from state to state. In Victoria, they're around $114 per title. In Queensland, they're about $180. It's the same for the discharge fee. Now, transfer of title fees are very different. These can range from a few $100s to literally thousands of dollars and tens of thousands of dollars, depending on your property's value. For example, even if you're a first home buyer in Queensland and there might be some stamp duty benefits, which we'll get to in a sec, you still have to pay transfer duty. So on a property purchase of say $500,000, you're going to pay almost $1,000 in transfer of title fees to the government. Think of transfer duty like another tax. Unfortunately, there's no way around this. It's not like the bank fees and you can't call your local counsellor and ask them to waive it. But just be aware of it and just be prepared for it because you're gonna have to pay it at settlement. Tip number 4 is stamp duty. Now I've finally got some good news for you, but I'll start with the bad news first. This is one of the few non-optional, non-negotiable fees when you're buying property in Australia. Stamp duty on a property purchase is a government state tax, and so as such it varies from state to state. Queensland, New South Wales to Victoria, it's all different, but it's all dependent ultimately on the purchase price of that property. And like I said, this can add up to tens to in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars that needs to be paid on settlement in addition to your deposit. Now the good news is that in some states, first home buyers get some relief on stamp duty. So for example, on a $500,000 home, first home buyers in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria won't pay any stamp duty. But if you're buying a second home, say in Queensland, you might have to pay up to $8,000 in stamp duty on that second home. So it actually, as a first home buyer, you're saving $8,000. It's pretty amazing. Now to estimate the cost, just go online and search for a stamp duty calculator online. There's heaps of them. They're pretty straightforward. Even the OSR and the Queensland government have one. We'll put some links down there to check it out. But it's quick and easy to calculate because like I said, it can add up to thousands of dollars. For example, on $1 million home in Queensland, your stamp duty is going to cost around $55,000. Now, I'm not going to say you're going out there and buy $1 million home for your first home, but I'm there to say it can be expensive, and if you don't factor it in, you can get caught out. Don't be alarmed, just be aware. Tip number 5, water and council rates. This is another government fee, not like there's already not enough. At the end of the day, councils need to charge fees, so there's infrastructure, there's parks, and there's stuff around your suburbs to do. The bins get taken out, your streets are clean. Each year as part of your council's budget process, they basically go through the motions of checking if they're going to put up your council rates and work out how much that's going to be increased by. The level of rate increase really is at the sole discretion of the council, but in my experience, it's around about inflation or CPI, which at the moment is around 3%. Again, this is one of those ones that's a non-negotiable, but it's just important to be aware of it before you buy the property because it can add another $1,000 to $2,000 per year onto the cost of owning and managing that property. So the hidden cost is when you go to settle a property. For example, if you're buying a property in say June and the previous owner has paid the council rates up till July, at settlement, you owe them 1 month's worth of council rates. So your solicitor or conveyancer will actually adjust and take money and ask you for that extra month's rates amount, which it could again be a couple $100, but you're still gonna have to pay it. So make sure you factor that in up front. You talk to your solicitor and you just make sure and see if there's any outstanding council rates that need to be paid and reimbursed to the old owner. Tip number 6, strata fees. Now another good news story on this for you. You won't pay strata or body corporate fees if you're buying a standalone house. But we'll come back to this in a sec. If you're buying a unit, a townhouse, or an apartment in a complex, you'll need to pay strata or body corporate fees to someone to manage that complex. Strata fees, or sometimes called levies, are basically a contribution that you make collectively as all owners in a certain complex to pay for things like gardening, maintenance, building work, if there's a cleaner, someone to take the bins out. It's all that sort of collective stuff that happens around the property, but also amongst that is your insurance for the complex. Now you're probably asking, why is this a hidden cost and why is this important? Well, strata or body corporate fees are important because once you're the owner, you've got to pay for those fees all the time going forward until the point that you sell the property. So how do you know a bit more about the strata or the body corporate and what's sort of happening around the complex and if there's issues? You get a strata report. Now in Sydney and New South Wales, you actually have to pay for these reports. And I know when I was buying my first home, it was something that I often would really cringe and get annoyed at because it could cost $400 or $500 to get this report to basically give you a report that says what's happening in this complex, if there's any issues, if there's problems, and if they've got lots of money in their collective sinking funds. But believe me, you want these reports. When I was buying my first home, cheaping out on these reports almost cost me $9,000 in special levies. Yeah, 9,000. Long story short, I was buying into a building that, while it looked really nice, had massive issues with water leaking, concrete cancer, and basically was rotting from the inside out. It was all stuff that you couldn't see unless you actually saw that strata report where they'd been trying to deal with that problem for the last 2 years. Not only that, the building was needing to raise money from all the building's owners. So while I'd been quoted a certain strata fee, they were looking at doing a special levy or a special, basically raising extra money from the owners in the next 6 months. So just remember, if the strata fees are already high and they're looking at increasing them, that's going to come out of your pocket once you're an owner of that property. Like I said, your lawyer can help you arrange these strata reports, or you can sometimes get it directly from the real estate agent. Depends on your state. But definitely it's worth checking out and getting a better understanding of not only what the strata costs today and what those fees are, but what it's going to cost in the future and if there are any issues in that in that complex. The next tip is everyone's favorite, insurance. But it's insurance that will protect you and not the bank this time. Now, the reason you want to listen is because there's a lot of buyers out there that think they don't need home and contents insurance. But that's just not true. Home and contents insurance is really divided into two parts. So think about if you got a house, you took the roof off, you tipped it upside down. The home insurance is for the part that would still be in my hand. So the walls, if it gets burnt down, that sort of stuff. But all the stuff that falls out, your possessions, your TV, your computer, your iPhone, even the kitchen appliances are considered the contents. So even if you own a unit, for example, it's still worth getting contents insurance, because if your fridge catches fire and sets alight to the kitchen, you're going to need contents insurance to replace all that stuff. Now, this is even more important and actually mandatory if you're buying a standalone house that's not in a strata property. One thing people always get tripped up on is who's responsible for the insurance. So like I said, on a house in Queensland, once you sign a contract, even though you don't own that property, you're responsible for the insurance at 5 o'clock from the day the contract is signed. Crazy law. Now, these are standard provisions that are often overlooked in contracts of sale in Queensland. So just make sure you get yourself protected. There's a lot of providers out there like Allianz that will even give you 90 days free cover for home and contents insurance from once you sign the contract. And if you don't go ahead with that property, that's fine. You can get it cancelled and rip it up and move on. So like I said, have a look online, make sure you get yourself protected, because if something were to happen, houses are expensive to replace and you want to have insurance in place to cover you. Tip number 8, legal costs. Now, unless you want to be like my mate Sam, who tried to do this himself, which I do not recommend because it was a pain in the ass, he had to run around with checks and that sort of stuff. Don't do it. Pay someone that's a professional. So unless you want to be Sam, you need to pay a legal professional or a conveyancer to basically do strata searches, to do property searches, and effectively to hand out checks at settlement between your bank and the person that you're buying the property from. That's what a lawyer does in property, basically. So if you're buying at auction, for example, you need to have already worked out who your solicitor is before you sign a contract, because you've got to put their name and details on that contract. If you're buying a private treaty or just a normal purchase, you can get the solicitor's details, along the process, because then once you sign the contract, basically they go out and do searches for you and check that there's no issues with the titles, and they can do a whole raft of stuff for you. In general, we find that a lot of solicitors charge a flat fee, or rather conveyancers who are just property solicitors charge a flat fee, whereas some solicitors in Sydney will charge a bit more, or Melbourne, because they actually inspect the contracts. Now, like I said, you can be a Sam and be a DIYer, but I definitely suggest not doing this, because one small mistake on a contract can end up spelling hundreds of thousands of dollars in mistakes and errors that you don't want to deal with. Get a professional's advice and get their help. Now, like I said, the legal fees usually cost between $1,000 to $1,500 in Queensland, and that includes a basic level of searches. My 2 suggestions on this would be just get the minimum level of searches that your solicitor recommends, so they can do all sorts of searches, they can check for development overlays and that sort of stuff. You don't need it. Get the minimum stuff, that's all you need. The second one I'd suggest is try and avoid one-man bands or small offices. I've seen cases where the solicitor's sick or they go on holidays or are unwell, and then that person can't settle their property because the solicitor's away. Number 9, building and pest reports. Now, I hate to say it, but this is one of the most common and almost mandatory costs that you need to pay for when you're buying a property. Especially in Queensland, you want to get one of these reports. And it looks at basically the structural soundness of a property. They check for moisture or damp, they've got these instruments and stuff. And they check for, even worse though, is termites and white ants, which are kind of the same thing. But you need to know, you want to know what you're getting into before you sign that contract. Now, a typical building report for say a 3 or 4 bedroom home will cost between $400 to $500, and a pest report will cost $300 to $400 as well. But if you get a combined building and pest report, it usually costs between sort of $400 to $500, and you get it all done in one go. Now, before we go on, I need to make an admission. These building and pest reports have literally saved me 5 times from buying duds of properties. Now, I'll admit, I spent over $2,000 in that year when I was looking at different properties and paying for different building and pest reports to see if I could find the right one. But I'm glad that I didn't go ahead with 4 of those 5 properties, because they all had issues. From concrete cancer, from termites, some had mold and wet in the wall that you couldn't get rid of, and issues with pipes that have been, lots of issues that you don't want to get involved in. Now, this is my warning, and this is something I'm sure you don't know, but you need to take note of this. Now, one thing you need to be wary of is a real estate agent that's pushing their own mate that's a building and pest inspector. Now, I don't want to say that they're going to do anything unethical or immoral, but you really need to have your own people, because if they're working together all the time, you don't know what things they're glossing over, and you just want to have yourself protected and have your own independent experts that work for you and that aren't working for the real estate agent. Now, the second warning is, I guess, being a Sam again and getting your mate Robbo or Jono, who's a builder and who can sort of tap some walls and do the old looking under the sink and seeing that there's no leaking moisture and that sort of stuff. Don't do it. Trust me. Building and pest inspectors are qualified builders. They have to be by trade in Queensland anyway, and they will look over it in fine detail. They'll climb into the roofs, they'll go under the cavities, they'll check for asbestos. It's all the stuff that your mate Robbo will miss. So my 3 tips for building and pest reports are: 1, these reports will help you find out if a property is a lemon and if you need to walk away. Number 2, with building and pest reports, make sure your building inspectors are a qualified builder. You can check on the Queensland Builders Association or a different website. And number 3, my personal favorite with building and pest reports is that if it's not too bad off, there's a few small issues like a leaky toilet or a broken tile on the roof, you can actually use the building and pest report to chip a bit off the property. So I've actually used this to save up to $5,000 and renegotiate with the agent. Even though it's signed, it didn't matter. I still was able to use and point out, there was issues and there was garbage in the roof actually in this case. So use it because you paid for it. Tip number 10, moving and connection costs. Now, I know this is a pretty straightforward one, so I'm gonna keep it quick. But the reality is moving does cost you money and a lot of people forget to factor it in. How much removals cost can vary from $300 to borrowing a mate's ute to several thousands of dollars if you're moving interstate or on the other side of your city. My probably 3 tips on this one are: 1, if you're moving into an apartment, just be aware that a lot of times you actually have to book out the lift before you move in. So you need to be a bit organized and plan your moving day around the body corporate and the people that live there, because they might not let you get the lift, and I've had issues with that in the past. Number 2, backloading is a great way to move stuff interstate. So I know when I moved up from Sydney to Brisbane, the cost to actually pay an individual removalist was like $5,000 or something crazy. So I use this thing called backloading, which they basically put all my furniture in the back of one of those road trains in amongst a bunch of other stuff that's going up there. It takes about a month, but it costs under $1,000 and it was amazing. The downside was there were a few cockroaches and stuff when my things arrived, but anyway, it was way cheaper, so it was worth it. And number 3, negotiate. So, with removalists, these guys are, if you offer them cash or if you offer them whatever, you can usually get them negotiated down, and if you offer to help them, I guess, as well, is another way to chip off that price. So, although they've quoted $1,000, say if you can help them move stuff or you can, box stuff up before, you might be able to chip a bit off that price and save something. Tip number 11, deposit. Now, tip number 11 is deposit. This is how much you're putting up front for the property and basically the lender's putting in the rest. Now, I'm gonna skip over the how much deposit you need. In general, it's 5% minimum. Some people say 20, but you can definitely buy a property with as little as 5%. It's not so much about having an issue with the deposit, but it's having the timing of the deposit right. And this is where the mistakes come in. So if you're getting a deposit gifted from parents, if you've got them in the share market, or if it's in equity in another property, it's important to have access to that money because you're gonna need it at different times of the process. In Queensland, the deposit is payable in 2 parts. You usually pay $1,000 or $2,000 deposit when you sign the contract, and that's still if you sign it subject to finance or building and pest and that sort of stuff. That $1,000 to $2,000 is refundable if you don't go ahead with the contract. The second part of the deposit is payable on balance, or basically when you get your finance approved or you say, yep, I'm going ahead and there's no backing out. This amount can be between 5 to 10%, and usually the real estate agents will ask for more because they want more security there. But here's the trick. You can put as little or as much as you want for that second part of the deposit. So in a lot of cases, I recommend only putting down $10,000 or $15,000, because really it's better to have the money in your account earning interest than having the real estate agents giving them more money. The other life hack I have here is, for some people, if you've got money in shares or you're relying on your parents as guarantor, finding that money at the last minute, getting 5 or 10 or 20 grand might not be easy. So a way to get around that is something called a deposit bond. That's basically a third party saying, yep, you're good for the money, here's the deposit, and that gets held there in place for your actual cash. These do come at a cost, so it's worth investigating that, but it's worth remembering that you might not necessarily need your full deposit when you go unconditional. You'll just need it definitely when you go and settle. All right, that's our tips, but I've still got one bonus for you. So our bonus hidden cost that I bet you weren't expecting is potential changes to your monthly loan repayment. Now, the reality is interest rates go up and they go down. For the last few years, they've been pretty stable. And in our recent lives, the last sort of 4 or 5 years, there's been a fairly low interest rate environment. But it was only 20 years ago that home loan interest rates, today are at 4%, 20 years ago, they were at 17%. So it's worth thinking about today what impact to your lifestyle a small increase in interest rates could have. It's worth also remembering that if you're only making the minimum repayment today, as interest rates go up, your repayment's going to increase a lot. So think about trying to put an extra $50 or $100 a week into your home loan to build a bit of a buffer against that. So my 2 tips on avoiding those hidden costs are: 1, try to put a bit extra in. Even on a $400,000 home loan, if you're paying $200 a week extra into the home loan, you can actually reduce the term of that home loan by half, by down to sort of 15 to 20 years. It's incredible how much a small amount can make on paying down your home loan quicker. The second tip would be to look at fixed rates. So if you're worried about interest rates going up, protect yourself and really just, who knows which way they're going to go, but at least with fixed rates, you've got certainty and for the next 3, 4, 5 years, your repayment's going to stay the same. Did you learn something new from this video? If you do, make sure you subscribe to our channel by clicking the button below. And also, if you want exclusive home buyer or market inside tips that I only share with home buyers, check out huntergalloway.com.au and subscribe to our newsletter. Now I want to turn over to you. Which of these strategies are you going to look at using first? Make sure you leave a comment below and let us know.